No Maid lasted a week with the Sicilian Korean Mafia boss, until the clumsy girl changed everything. She was on her knees on his black marble floor, picking up the shattered pieces of a ceramic plate that had been mounted on his wall for 30 years, when he said it. "You have 30 seconds to give me one reason I shouldn't have you removed from this building." Mia Callahan looked up at him from the floor.
Please, sir, I didn't mean to
She had
break it. I'll pay
ceramic
for
dust on her
everything.
cheek, her uniform was half a size too big, and she had been on the job for exactly 11 minutes. "I really need this job," she
Sir, I'm
said.
so sorry.
Kang Lorenzo
Please, sir, I
Han,
didn't mean to break it.
the
I'll pay
most
for
feared man
everything.
in two criminal worlds, stared down at her. "That,"
Then let me work it
he
off.
said
I'll do
quietly,
anything.
"is the
Anything.
worst reason I have ever heard." "I know," Mia whispered, "but it's the only one I have." The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds. Then he turned and walked back into his study without firing her. And that was the moment, though neither of them knew it yet, that everything began to change. Comment ceramic, if you already know she's going to be the one he can't get rid of. They said the penthouse on the 61st floor of Han Tower eats people alive. 6 maids in 6 weeks. The first one left without her shoes. The second was found sitting on the curb outside, crying in 3 languages. 2 simply blocked the agency's number and never explained why. 1 filed a restraining order that was dismissed without explanation. And the 6th disappeared from the agency's roster entirely. No forwarding address. No explanation. Just gone. To the corporate world, Kang Lorenzo Han was the ice-cold CEO of Hanmar Global, the most powerful private shipping conglomerate bridging East Asia and Southern Europe. $11 billion of legitimate empire, 40 floors of polished glass and black marble, and a reputation for making grown men leave meetings unable to look anyone in the eye for a week. But to the underworld, to the men who moved in shadows between Palermo and Seoul, he was something else entirely. El Sangfredo, cold blood, the only man who had ever merged the Sicilian Cosa Nostra with the Korean criminal network into a single, breathing, untouchable empire. His penthouse was not a home. It was a fortress dressed as a palace. And the one rule every person who entered already knew was simple. You do not touch, you do not ask, and you do not look at the study door. No one lasted a week. Until Mia Callahan. She was 25 years old, drowning in $65,000 of her younger brother's university debt after their parents died in a car accident 2 years prior. She was the only thing standing between him and dropping out. She talked to herself when she was nervous, which was always, and she showed up to her first day carrying a tote bag with a broken strap held together by a hair tie, wearing a second-hand housekeeper's uniform that was half a size too big, with no plan beyond getting through the front door. She took the job because the agency told her the pay was 4 times the standard rate. She didn't ask why, because she already knew the answer was something she didn't want to hear. The elevator to the 61st floor was silent and fast and smelled of cedarwood and something colder that she couldn't name. When the doors opened, the penthouse stretched out before her like a cathedral that had decided to become a home and then changed its mind halfway through. Black marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline, gallery art on walls the color of ash, and silence so complete it had a texture. Mia stepped out, adjusting the strap of her tote bag. A door opened down the hallway. A man in a very expensive suit walked out of it, moving at the speed of someone trying not to run. His face was the color of uncooked dough. His watch, she noticed, was cracked across the face. The glass splintered in a starburst pattern, as though someone had made a point. He walked past her without making eye contact and pressed the elevator button 17 times in succession. Mia watched him go. Then she turned back toward the hallway. Kang Lorenzo Han was standing in the study doorway. He was 6'2", half Sicilian and half Korean, and he was wearing a black silk robe over tailored charcoal trousers at 9 in the morning like he was daring the universe to comment on it. His hair was dark, slightly longer than corporate convention would suggest, and his eyes were the detail that stopped her completely. One was deep brown, the other was a startling pale amber. A genetic anomaly that people in both his worlds called a bad omen. Together they performed a flat, unhurried assessment of her that lasted approximately 3 seconds and communicated clearly that he had already decided she wouldn't last. "You're the new one," he said. Not a question. A verdict delivered to a courtroom that hadn't been asked. "Yes," Mia said. "I'm Mia Callahan. From the agency. I'm here to." She took one step forward. The edge of the silk hallway runner caught the toe of her shoe with the precision of something that had been waiting specifically for her. She pitched sideways into the wall. The decorative Sicilian ceramic plate mounted beside the study door, hand-painted, 30 years old, flew off its hook and hit the black marble floor and shattered into 11 pieces. She counted them later. 11. The silence that followed was geological in its weight. Mia stared at the pieces on the floor. Then she looked up at him. "I'll pay for that," she whispered. "Eventually. Or I can glue it. I'm actually not bad at gluing things. Depending on the material. Ceramic is very gluable." Kang Lorenzo looked at her for 4 full seconds. His expression did not change. Then he turned back toward the study. "Clean up the ceramic. The kitchen must be spotless by noon. Do not enter the study. Do not touch the black lacquer cabinet in the dining room." He paused at the doorway without turning around. "And stop talking to yourself. I can hear you through the walls." The door closed. Mia stood in the hallway, ceramic dust settling around her shoes, her heart beating in her ears. She was not fired. She had absolutely no idea why. She found the cleaning supplies in a cabinet that was better organized than any home she had ever lived in. She got on her hands and knees and picked up every shard of ceramic. She cleaned the kitchen until it reflected the ceiling. She moved through the penthouse quietly and carefully, cataloging everything, the way her mind always did automatically. The way it had done since she was a child, and her mother called it a gift and her teachers called it unsettling. Mia had a photographic memory for visual detail, not for numbers, not for text, for the physical arrangement of the world around her. She noticed when things were out of place the way other people noticed a wrong note in a familiar song. She could not explain it. She simply saw things, and what she saw in the penthouse, as she moved through it quietly on that first day, was a place that was immaculate on its surface and deeply, carefully organized beneath it. Everything had a precise location. The distance between objects on every surface was intentional. The art on the walls was not decorative. It was geographic. A map of influence rendered in oil and canvas that only made sense if you already knew what you were looking at. She was not supposed to know what she was looking at. She made sure she looked like she didn't. Monday arrived with a delegation. For Korean men in suits that cost more than Mia's debt, came off the elevator at 11 in the morning. Mia was cleaning the entrance hall. She heard them before she saw them, their voices low and formal in a conversation that stopped the moment the elevator doors opened and they registered her presence. She kept her head down and continued wiping the console table near the entrance. The men moved into the main hall. Kang Lorenzo came out of the study to receive them. The greeting was precise and hierarchical, and Mia could feel the tension in it even with her back turned, the way you feel a shift in air pressure before a storm. And then she knocked over the vase. It was tall and pale celadon, and it had been sitting on the console table, and her elbow found it with the unerring instinct of a heat-seeking device. It toppled and Mia caught it, but the motion was abrupt and loud. A sharp ceramic clatter against the table edge that cracked through the formal silence like a starting pistol. One of the Korean men flinched violently. His hand moved to the inside of his jacket, then stopped. Because the room had looked at Mia, and Mia was standing there with her elbow out and a celadon vase tilted at 45 degrees and an expression of pure mortified apology, and whatever the hand inside the jacket had been reaching for stayed where it was. The tension in the room broke like a wave. The greeting resumed. Someone almost smiled. Kang Lorenzo looked at Mia across the entrance hall. His expression was unreadable, but he did not look away immediately, which was new. Tuesday, Mia accidentally set the commercial laundry to the wrong temperature cycle and shrunk a dress shirt belonging to a visiting Sicilian underboss named Turi Falcone. The man was broad and humorless, and he stood in the laundry room doorway staring at the shirt she held out to him with an expression that suggested he was drafting a list. "I'm so sorry," Mia said. "I can have it replaced by this afternoon. I know a place in Midtown that does same-day custom." "It's fine," Kang Lorenzo said from behind Turi Falcone, and something in the way he said it closed the conversation completely. He handed Turi one of his own shirts. It fit across the shoulders, but the difference in their builds made it read, for the entirety of the lunch meeting that followed, as borrowed. As subordinate, Kang Lorenzo won the negotiation inside 40 minutes. Mia found out later from De-young, who told her things in the tone of a man performing a security risk assessment, that the meeting had been deadlocked for 2 weeks prior. Wednesday, she dropped an entire tray of espresso cups outside the study door. The crash was spectacular. 6 cups and their saucers and a small ceramic sugar dish. The sound bounced off the marble floor and the high ceilings and arrived inside the study like an announcement. Inside, a man Mia had never seen before stopped speaking mid-sentence. She found out 3 days later that the man had been about to say a name that, if spoken aloud and heard by the wrong person in the hallway, would have ended a very careful and very necessary protection arrangement that Kang Lorenzo had spent 8 months constructing. The wrong person had been standing in the hallway, right next to Mia and her shattered espresso cups. The name was never said. Each time, Kang Lorenzo said nothing to her about it. But he stopped flinching when she broke things. He started watching her instead, with that unreadable assessment in his mismatched eyes, like a man revising a calculation he thought he had already solved. Drop a jar in the comments every time Mia accidentally saved his empire without knowing it. We're counting. Thursday afternoon, Kang Lorenzo was in the secondary office down the hall on a video call that Mia could hear through the door was tense and conducted in rapid alternating Italian and Korean. She was in the dining room, polishing the long mahogany table with the focused attention she gave to tasks when she was trying not to think about the black lacquer cabinet sitting against the far wall. She had been told not to touch it on her first morning. She had not touched it. She had not looked at it directly for more than 2 seconds at a time. She had cleaned around it with the careful, deliberate avoidance of someone who understood that some boundaries in this particular apartment were not metaphorical. But the cabinet door was ajar. Not open. Just fractionally, barely perceptibly ajar, as though it had been closed in a hurry and hadn't caught. Mia was not going to touch it. She was absolutely not going to touch it. She reached past it to dust the shelf above, keeping her elbow tight to her body, her movements controlled, and the sleeve of her too big uniform caught the cabinet handle cleanly and pulled the door fully open. A stack of folders slid off the interior shelf and fanned across the dining room floor. Mia dropped to her knees and began gathering them immediately, her eyes down, her hands moving fast. She was not going to look. She was putting them back. She was simply putting them back. Her photographic memory activated the way it always did, involuntarily, before her conscious mind could issue instructions to the contrary. Her eyes passed over the top folder and the image was already stored before she registered what it contained. A surveillance photograph. The lobby of her brother's university dormitory. Students in the background, mid-motion, candid and unaware. Her brother Liam was in the background, circled in red ink. Mia went completely still on the dining room floor. "What are you doing?" Kang Lorenzo was standing in the dining room doorway. His video call was over. His voice was not raised. It was something far more dangerous than raised. It was flat and absolute, and it had the quality of a door being closed and locked from the outside. Mia stood up. The folder was in her hands without her deciding to pick it up. Her face was the temperature of the marble floor. Why is my brother in this photograph? It was not a question the way his had not been a question. It was something that needed an answer the way a room on fire needs an exit. Behind Kang Lorenzo, a man stepped forward. De-young. Korean, built like a freight elevator, with the flat eyes of someone who made decisions quickly and did not revisit them. His hand moved to the inside of his jacket. "She's seen the surveillance package," De-young said. "We handle this." "Don't," Kang Lorenzo said. "One word." De-young's hand stopped. Kang Lorenzo walked into the dining room. He stopped in front of Mia and took the folder from her hands with a slowness that was more frightening than speed would have been. He looked at her face. She was terrified, but she was not backing away. She was standing her ground for her brother, and he could see the difference between fear and surrender, and she had chosen neither. "Your brother isn't a target," he said finally. "He's insurance. Against you. Against me." Mia stared at him. "I'm a maid. You were," Kang Lorenzo said. "Now you've seen the cabinet." Comment standing ground, if you felt Mia's courage right there. She did not move. She did not blink. She stood for her brother, and that was everything. Kang Lorenzo set the folder down on the dining room table. He did not sit. He never sat when he was thinking. He moved to the window and looked out at Manhattan the way a man looks at something he owns and is currently deciding the future of. "There is a thief inside my operation," he said. "Someone has been moving money. My accountants have found the gap but cannot find the mechanism. The numbers are clean on the surface. Whatever is underneath them is buried in a way that requires a specific kind of mind to uncover." Mia watched him. "What does that have to do with me? I had the agency send someone ordinary, someone no one would look at twice. Someone who could move through this penthouse while my people came and went and simply observe." He turned from the window. "I was going to use you as passive surveillance. You didn't need to know. You just needed to be here and be invisible. You were going to use me without telling me. Yes, the honesty of it landed harder than a lie would have. But you found the cabinet," Kang Lorenzo continued, "which means you are no longer passive, which means we have a different conversation now." He looked at her steadily with those mismatched eyes. "Your brother's debt. How much?" Mia stared at him. 65,000. The number sat in the room between them. He looked at it the way men like him looked at numbers, as a variable rather than a weight. "Stay. Watch. Tell me what you see that doesn't fit. Your memory for visual detail, yes, the agency's file was thorough, makes you more valuable to me than anyone currently in this building. When the thief is identified, I clear the debt. All of it. And if I say no..." Kang Lorenzo looked at her without blinking. "Then you walk out of here, and I find someone else. And your brother remains in that photograph." Mia felt the words land one by one like stones dropping into still water. She looked at the folder on the table. She looked at the man by the window who had just told her the truth when he could have told her anything else, and she understood that the truth was its own kind of threat when delivered by someone with nothing to prove. "You're a monster," she said quietly. "Yes," he agreed, without any emotion at all. "Do we have an arrangement?" Mia looked down at her hands. Then she looked back up at him. "I want it in writing." Something moved across his face so quickly she almost missed it. Not quite a smile. The shadow of one, passing through on its way somewhere else. "Dae-young will draft it tonight." 3 days later, the annual Hanmar Private Summit arrived in the penthouse like a weather system. It was the gathering that determined the direction of both wings of the operation for the following year, Sicilian and Korean, legitimate and otherwise, all of it conducted over a dinner that cost more per head than Mia made in a month and was catered by a restaurant that did not have a public address. Kang Lorenzo told her the morning, standing in the kitchen while she made his black coffee, speaking to her reflection in the window rather than to her directly. "You will serve tonight. You will move through the room and you will remember everything. Every exchange. Every object that passes between hands. Every conversation that stops when you approach and resumes when you leave." He picked up his coffee without looking at it. "Afterward, you will tell me what you saw. All of it. Everything your memory recorded." "Yes." Mia nodded. Then she looked down at her uniform. "I'll need to change. There is a dress in the guest suite. Wear it." She found it hanging in the wardrobe of the guest suite in a garment bag from a boutique on Fifth Avenue, whose name she recognized from magazine covers. She unzipped the bag and stood looking at it for a long moment. It was deep burgundy silk, structured at the shoulder, floor length, and it had been selected by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. She put it on and stood in front of the mirror and did not recognize herself immediately. The girl with the broken tote bag strap and the second-hand uniform was still there somewhere underneath. But the surface had changed into something she didn't have a word for yet. When she walked into the main hall to begin the pre-dinner setup, Kang Lorenzo was standing at the far end of the room in conversation with Dae-young. He stopped mid-sentence. Dae-young noticed. Kang Lorenzo looked away first, which Dae-young also noticed and said nothing about, which was a form of commentary in itself. He stopped mid-sentence. Comment burgundy, if that detail just did something to you. The dinner was 40 people seated at the long mahogany table, and Mia moved through it like a current through still water. She poured. She cleared. She was invisible in the way that good service is always invisible, which meant she was everywhere. Her memory catalogued without effort and without mercy. Who sat closest to whom? Whose glass remained untouched for the duration of the meal? Where the silences landed and who created them? And the napkin. During the second course, the man at the far end of the table with silver cufflinks. She had seen those cufflinks before, in the entrance hall on Monday, on the wrist of a man who had arrived separately from the main delegation and left before the others, passed a folded linen napkin across the table to the man directly opposite him in a dark blue tie. The motion was natural and unhurried. But the napkin was wrong. It was too stiff. It held its shape when it should have draped. There was something inside it. She filed it away and continued moving. Afterward, when the guests had migrated to the main room and the table was being cleared, Kang Lorenzo found her in the kitchen. He closed the door behind him. He looked at her with the expression he had been wearing more frequently in the past few days, the one that belonged to a man revising a calculation. "Tell me," Mia told him. She started from the moment the first guest arrived and she moved through the evening in sequence, describing positions, exchanges, body language, objects. When she reached the napkin, she described it precisely, the way it held its fold, the angle at which the man in the blue tie received it and immediately placed his hand over it on the table. Kang Lorenzo went very still. "The cufflinks," he said. "Describe them." She described them, the shape, the engraving on the face, the way they caught the light at the far end of the table. She described them with the fidelity of a photograph. "That is Turi Falcone," Kang Lorenzo said. His voice had dropped into that register she was learning to recognize, the one that meant something serious and irreversible was being decided. "And the man in the blue tie is Park Seon-jae. He is my logistics director. He has been with Hanmar for 11 years. Mia looked at him. He didn't touch his wine glass once during the entire meal. People don't drink when they're afraid of saying something they shouldn't, or when they're concentrating on not making a mistake. The silence between them was different from the silences of the first week. It had a different weight, a different quality, like the silence after a door opens rather than the silence after one closes. "You did well tonight," Kang Lorenzo said. It was the first time he had said anything like it. It arrived in the room without ceremony, and it meant more than it should have for that reason. "Thank you," Mia said, and because she was Mia and her mouth operated on a slight delay from her brain, she added, "The dress helped. I think I'm more observant when I'm not worried about my uniform falling off one shoulder." He looked at her for a moment. Then he turned and opened the kitchen door. "Keep the dress," he said, and walked out. What happened next occurred in the space between one breath and the next. Mia was following him back toward the main room when her eye caught the window. The floor-to-ceiling glass that ran the length of the dining room reflected the corridor behind her with the clarity of a mirror. And in that reflection, at the far end of the corridor near the service entrance, Turi Falcone was standing with one of the building's security personnel. He was not leaving. He had not left with the other guests. And the security man beside him was holding something at his side that was not part of any security uniform Mia had seen in this building over the past week. "Lorenzo!" She grabbed his arm and pulled. Her heel found a seam in the marble floor with the absolute reliability that had defined her entire week, and her feet went out from under her, and she pulled Kang Lorenzo down with her behind the length of the dining table as a silenced shot punched through the floor-to-ceiling glass exactly where the back of his head had been. The glass did not shatter. It spiderwebbed outward from the point of impact in a perfect frozen explosion and held. They were on the floor. Kang Lorenzo had a gun in his hand that she had not seen him draw. His other arm was across her, pressing her flat. She could hear his breathing, controlled and deliberate, and her own, which was neither. From the corridor, the sound of running. Then Dae-young's voice, barking in Korean. Then silence of a different kind entirely. Kang Lorenzo looked at her. She looked at him. They were close enough that she could see the amber in his mismatched eyes catching the light from the fractured window. "I tripped," she said. Her voice was almost steady. "I know," he said, and something in those two words, in the way he said them, had changed entirely from every other time he had spoken to her. She saved his life by tripping. Comment, "I tripped," if Mia just became your favorite character in fiction. Tori Falcone did not make it to the elevator. Dae-young saw to that personally. The security man who had been with him turned out to be on Park Seon-jae's payroll, which confirmed the shape of what they were dealing with in a way that made Kang Lorenzo's jaw set into a line that did not soften for the rest of the night. He told her about her apartment 40 minutes later in the main room, after the building had been swept and the fractured window had been covered, and Mia was sitting on the edge of the vast gray sofa with a cup of tea she was holding more for the warmth than any intention of drinking it. "You cannot go home," he said. She looked up at him. "Liam. Already moved. 2 hours ago, before the dinner started." Dae-young relocated him to a secure residence near the university. He has been told it is a housing upgrade provided by a scholarship program. A pause. He seemed pleased. Apparently the new accommodation has a better internet connection. Mia stared at him. The protection had been in motion before she knew she needed it. Before tonight had happened. He had moved her brother before telling her, which meant he had been thinking about her brother's safety as a priority rather than as an afterthought, and she did not know what to do with that information, so she looked back down at her tea. "The debt," Kang Lorenzo said. "I am wiring the clearance tonight. Before anything else. You haven't found the thief yet." "No. But you nearly died in my dining room. The terms of our arrangement no longer feel adequate." He said it the way he said most things, without inflection, which somehow made it worse to hear. He crossed to the window and looked out at the city. "You will stay here. The guest suite is yours for as long as this takes. Dae-young will have your things retrieved from the apartment tomorrow." Mia nodded. She looked around the penthouse that could contain her entire queen's apartment 6 times over and thought about Liam in his new room near the university, pleased about the internet connection, entirely unaware of what his sister was currently sitting in the middle of. She thought about her mother, who used to say that Mia's clumsiness was the universe's way of making sure she always landed exactly where she was supposed to be. She was not sure her mother had pictured this specific scenario. She could not sleep. The guest suite bed was the size of a small continent and had sheets with a thread count that felt like sleeping inside a cloud. And at 3 in the morning she gave up and wrapped herself in her own worn university hoodie over the penthouse's guest robe and padded out into the main hall in bare feet. The penthouse at 3 in the morning was a different creature. All shadow and city light through the glass. The Manhattan skyline laid out below like a circuit board that had decided to become beautiful. She gravitated without deciding to toward the dining room. And without deciding to, she began replaying the dinner in her mind the way her memory always did when something in it hadn't finished resolving. She found paper in a kitchen drawer and sat at the dining table and began to draw it. The seating layout, the positions, the napkin pass, the untouched wine glass. She was not thinking about the investigation. She was thinking the way she always thought, visually, spatially, arranging the pieces of the evening into a map she could look at. And then she stopped. Park Seon-jae in his blue tie, receiving the napkin from Tori Falcone at the far end of the table. Park Seon-jae in the background of the surveillance photograph from the black lacquer cabinet. The lobby of Liam's university dormitory. Not circled. Not marked. Just standing in the corner of the frame in a dark suit, looking at something outside the photograph's edge. She had not registered it the first time because he had not been marked. He had simply been there. And her memory had stored him the way it stored everything, completely and without judgment, waiting for the moment when the context arrived to make him mean something. "You're awake." Kang Lorenzo was standing in the doorway of the dining room. Dark trousers, a loose black shirt, barefoot. Without the suit, he looked like a man rather than an institution. He looked, for the first time since she had arrived, like someone who also could not sleep. "I was drawing the dinner," Mia said. She pushed the paper toward him across the table. He walked over and looked at it. She had drawn every seat, every position, every detail she could render in a kitchen pen on the back of a grocery list. He picked it up and looked at it for a long moment. "Park C&J," Mia said, and pointed at the position she had marked at the table. He received the napkin. He was the endpoint. She paused. He was also in the surveillance photograph from the cabinet. Not circled. Not marked. Standing in the corner of the lobby of Liam's dormitory. Kang Lorenzo looked up from the paper very slowly. "He was watching," Mia said. "Not my brother. The building. He was assessing the access points, which means he wasn't there because of my brother. He was there because of me. He was checking whether I was a real civilian or whether I was already working for someone." She looked up at Kang Lorenzo. "Park C&J knew you were going to plant someone in this penthouse. He just didn't know it would be me specifically." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees without the windows opening. "Park has been with Hanmar for 11 years, Kang Lorenzo said quietly. "He wrote the security protocol for the shipping manifests. He knows every access point in the entire logistics network. Which means if he's working with Turi Falcone, then Falcone doesn't need to break in anywhere," Kang Lorenzo said. "He already has the keys." He set the paper down on the table. He looked at Mia across the grocery list diagram she had drawn in the middle of the night in a borrowed robe and a faded university hoodie. He looked at her the way he had been carefully not looking at her for an entire week. "Mia." It was the first time he had used her name. It arrived in the room differently than she expected, like a door opening inward. He reached across the table toward her hand. Every alarm in the penthouse detonated simultaneously. The red emergency lights strobed along the ceiling and the sound was physical, a wall of noise that hit the chest before the ears understood it. Kang Lorenzo was moving before Mia had processed standing up. He crossed the room and pressed a panel beside the bookcase, and it opened to reveal a biometric safe. He pressed his thumb to the scanner. "Park sold the building layout to Falcone," he said, pulling out a tactical firearm and checking it with the practiced speed of someone for whom this was muscle memory. "They are not waiting for tomorrow." The heavy oak double doors of the penthouse blew off their hinges. Smoke and pulverized drywall billowed into the main room, and through it came the sound of tactical boots on marble, measured and deliberate. The sound of people who were paid to do this and had done it before. Kang Lorenzo shoved Mia behind the kitchen island. "Stay down. Do not move. Do not make a sound." He looked at her once with those mismatched eyes and then he was gone, moving through his own penthouse in the dark and the smoke like a man who had memorized every shadow in it. Mia pressed her back against the kitchen island and listened. 2 shots. A crash. Rapid Italian from somewhere down the hall. The sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Then silence from the east corridor. A silence that felt wrong. The east corridor led to the study. The room she had never entered. The camera feed to that section of the penthouse, she had seen it on the security monitor before the alarms triggered, had gone dark. Someone had cut it specifically. Someone who knew which section of the building to blind first. Mia left the kitchen island. She moved through the smoke-filled dining room and down the east corridor with her back to the wall and her heart making more noise than her feet. The study door was open. Inside, in the darkness broken only by the red strobe of the emergency lights, a man in tactical gear was crouched behind the desk, pulling drives from a hidden server rack behind a false wall that had been opened from the inside with a code he should not have had. Mia's hand found the antique Korean brass ceremonial bowl on the corner of the desk. She did not think. She swung it. Her aim was what it had always been, which was catastrophic. The bowl missed the mercenary by 14 inches and connected directly with the power coupling of the server rack with a force that surprised even her. The coupling blew. Sparks showered the room in a cascade of white and gold light. The electrical surged through the mercenary backward off his feet, and he hit the floor hard, and the lights in the east corridor went out completely. Mia stood in the dark holding a dented 400-year-old ceremonial bowl with sparks dying around her feet. Kang Lorenzo came around the corner of the study doorway with his weapon raised and found the mercenary on the floor and Mia standing over him. He lowered the gun. He looked at the man on the floor. He looked at the server rack, which was intact. He looked at Mia. "I was aiming for his head," she said. Her voice was very small. "I know," Kang Lorenzo said. Something in his chest was doing something he did not have a current protocol for. He crossed the room in 3 strides and took the ceremonial bowl out of her hands and set it on the desk, and then he looked at her face in the red emergency light. "The drives are safe," he said. "I destroyed the bowl. The bowl is 400 years old." He looked at it. It was also extremely ugly. He took her by the arm, gently and completely. "We need to move. That was the vanguard. Come with me." He pulled her down the corridor toward the rear of the penthouse where a reinforced steel door waited at the end of the hall. He pressed his thumb to the scanner. The door opened onto a private elevator shaft, steel-plated, silent. "Get in," he said. "What about you?" "I have to wipe the manifest servers. If Falcone's people reach the physical drives in the secondary system, every shipping lane on 3 continents is compromised. I will be 4 minutes behind you." "Lorenzo." She did not move. "Please." He stopped. He turned and looked at her fully, the way he had been moving toward all week, the way everything in the past 7 days had been moving toward, 1 broken ceramic plate and 1 shattered espresso tray and 1 400-year-old ceremonial bowl at a time. He framed her face in both hands. His thumbs moved across her cheekbones. "I have survived 32 years in this world," he said quietly. "I survived my father's war. I survived the merger. I survived every betrayal this empire has ever produced." His jaw tightened once. "I have never once in my life been afraid of not surviving. Until tonight. Because you are standing in this hallway." He held her face for 1 more second. "Get in the elevator. Please." The doors closed between them. Mia slid down the wall of the steel box and pressed her fists against her mouth and did not breathe until the doors opened in the underground garage where Dae-Young was waiting with an armored car and Liam was standing beside it in a university sweatshirt holding a takeout bag, confused and safe and entirely unaware of anything. Then the floor above shook. The concrete ceiling of the garage exhaled dust. The lights flickered once. "No," Mia said, and her legs decided they were done. Dae-Young grabbed her. She was pulling toward the stairwell door before he had finished the sentence telling her they had to leave. The stairwell door opened. Kang Lorenzo Han walked out of it. His shirt was ruined. There was a cut above his eyebrow. He was carrying a server drive under one arm, and he looked like something that had walked out of a fire by informing the fire that it did not have permission to win. Mia pulled free of Dae-Young and crossed the garage and put both arms around him before she decided to. He dropped the server drive. He caught her. He lifted her off the ground and held her with his face pressed to the top of her head and said nothing, which was the most complete sentence he had ever constructed. Liam watched this from beside the armored car, takeout bag in hand. "Should I ask?" he said to Dae-Young. "No," said Dae-Young. 48 hours later, word moved through the right channels in the right whispers. Kang Lorenzo Han had died in a penthouse fire. A tragic accident. A gas leak, they said. The papers ran it small because the right people had been spoken to about where to run it. Park C&J called an emergency session of the Hanmar board and invoked the legal continuity clause, naming himself interim logistics director with full executive access pending succession. Turi Falcone arrived from his hotel and took a seat at the boardroom table like a man who had already measured the room for new furniture. The men who had been waiting years for this particular morning settled into their chairs with the satisfaction of people who believed they had already won. Park C&J smoothed his tie and began distributing revised shipping assignments. He was mid-sentence when the boardroom doors opened. Kang Lorenzo Han walked in wearing a 3-piece charcoal suit with a burgundy pocket square, the precise shade of the dress he had sent to the guest suite 4 nights ago. He walked in like a man returning to reclaim something that had never actually changed hands, because in the ways that mattered, it hadn't. One step behind him, Mia Callahan walked in. She was wearing a structured black dress and carrying a slim leather folder, and her posture was the posture of someone who had already finished the conversation the room thought it was about to start. She looked nothing like the girl who had arrived 8 days ago with a broken tote bag strap. She looked exactly like that girl, which was the thing that made her dangerous. De-Jong locked the boardroom doors. The click moved through the room like a stone dropping into still water. Turi Falcone's hand moved toward his jacket. 4 of Kang Lorenzo's men stepped out of positions along the wall that no one had noticed them occupying. "Sit down, Turi," Kang Lorenzo said pleasantly. "We have already eaten." Park Seon-jae had gone the color of the boardroom walls. His mouth opened. "Miss Callahan," Kang Lorenzo said, and gestured toward the room. "The floor is yours." Mia stepped forward. She opened the leather folder. She did not trip. She did not drop it. Her heart was conducting a full orchestral performance inside her chest, but her hands were steady and her voice, when it came, was clear and unhurried and filled the boardroom without effort. "At 4:47 on Thursday morning," she began, "I completed a cross-reference of the Hanmar logistics manifests against the transfer records of a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Hyunmar Transit Holdings." She set the first page on the table in front of Park Seon-jae. Over 18 months, this account received $4.3 million diverted from Hanmar operating funds through a series of manifest adjustments buried in the quarterly storage fee columns. The authorization credentials used to clear each transfer belonged to Park Seon-jae. Park Seon-jae stared at the page. The funds were staged through Hyunmar Transit Holdings before being distributed to accounts controlled by Turi Falcone's network, in exchange for a promised position in the restructured operation following Mr. Han's removal. Mia placed a second page on the table. "This is the confirmation receipt." The $4.3 million was rerouted back to Hanmar's primary operating account at 4:51 the same morning. She placed a third page on the table. "And this is the evidentiary submission confirmation from the FBI field office and Interpol, filed jointly at 7 a.m. today, containing the complete transfer record, the shell company charter, and the communications log recovered from the server drives." The silence in the boardroom was the deepest silence the room had ever produced. Turi Falcone looked at Mia across the mahogany table. The look was cold and absolute and contained a specific quality of hatred reserved for people who have cost you something you believed was already yours. "You're a maid," he said. Mia said. "I was fired." Kang Lorenzo moved before the sentence had finished. He reached Falcone's chair in 4 strides and removed Turi Falcone from it with one hand in a manner that communicated with perfect clarity that the meeting was over. De-Jong was already moving. 2 more men entered through the side door. Park Seon-jae began to say something and then looked at the room and decided not to. Within 3 minutes, the boardroom was empty except for Kang Lorenzo and Mia. The doors clicked shut. Mia set the leather folder on the table. The adrenaline left her system all at once the way it always did, like a tide going out, and her knees did the thing they always did afterward, which was suggest very strongly that sitting down was a reasonable option. She put both hands flat on the mahogany table. "So," she said, looking at the table, "I'm fired." "Yes. Because the cabinet is no longer relevant. Because you are no longer a maid." He had crossed the room while she was looking at the table, and he was closer than she had registered, which was something she was going to need to stop being surprised by. "You were never particularly good at it, if I'm honest." "I was excellent at it." "You broke 11 pieces of ceramic on your first morning. I counted them. I know exactly how many there were." She looked up. He was very close. The mismatched eyes, the amber and the deep brown, were doing the thing she had no category for. "You used my name," she said quietly. "In the dining room. 3 in the morning. It was the first time." "Yes." "It was also the moment every alarm in the building went off." "Yes. I've been thinking about the timing." "So have I," Kang Lorenzo said. Something shifted in his expression the way a tide shifts. The same water, completely different direction. "I don't keep people," he said. "I have not kept anyone in this penthouse for a reason that has served me well for a very long time. And now," And now a woman who broke my ceramic on her first morning and shrunk a Sicilian underboss's shirt and knocked a 400-year-old ceremonial bowl into an electrical coupling and drew a criminal conspiracy on the back of a grocery list at 3 in the morning, has dismantled a $4 million coup with a leather folder and her own memory. He looked at her. And I find I have revised my position on keeping people. When he kissed her, it was deliberate in the way that everything he did was deliberate, considered and complete and entirely without hesitation. And it was also the single most unguarded thing she had ever seen him do. Mia's hand reached up to his lapel. Her elbow found the leather folder on the table's edge. The entire reconstructed evidentiary dossier, every page, slid off the mahogany table and fanned across the boardroom floor in a slow, complete, magnificent catastrophe. They both looked down at the papers. Kang Lorenzo looked back at her. The ice was gone. What had replaced it was something his face had very little practice with and was doing its best with given the limited rehearsal time. Something that looked, on the face of Il Sangfredo, the most feared man in 2 criminal worlds, remarkably like helpless. "I'll get them," Mia whispered. "Leave them," he said and pulled her back. "The Empire is not going anywhere." And outside the 61st floor boardroom windows, Manhattan glittered on in complete indifference. 40 floors below, a fortress dressed as a palace where a girl with a broken tote bag strap had walked in to pay off a debt and ended up, entirely by accident, owning the whole kingdom. Mia walked into a lion's den with nothing but a photographic memory and catastrophic spatial awareness. She broke everything she touched. She remembered everything she saw. And in the end, the most dangerous man in 2 criminal worlds was not brought down by a rival or a weapon or a war. He was undone, completely and without resistance, by a girl who couldn't cross a room without knocking something over and couldn't look at a set of numbers without seeing exactly what was wrong with them. Sometimes the person who changes everything doesn't arrive with power. They arrive with a second-hand uniform and a broken tote bag strap and the particular kind of courage that doesn't know it's courage because it's too busy trying to make rent. Tell us in the comments, what was the moment Mia broke you? Was it the ceramic? The grocery list diagram? I was fired? Drop your moment below and let's see which one hit the hardest. If the story found you at the right time, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that being underestimated is not a weakness. It is a head start. Subscribe and turn on notifications. There are more stories coming where the wrong person walks into the right place and changes absolutely everything.